Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we discuss the history of Bobby Aro, the Northland performer who riveted fans with Finnglish jokes and music. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to share more about this Iron Range singer is News Tribune reporter Teri Cadeau. Teri, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
I'm excited to talk more about more Finnish connections in our region. I feel like that's one of our recurring themes that's happened in this podcast. We've obviously, I think the first time we did it was Toimi School, as well as more recently the St. Urho's parade.
Yes.
And it just keeps coming up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so first off, maybe let's get into who is Bobby Aro. For those maybe aren't familiar with him, I'll have to admit I'm not too familiar with him. Granted, to my credit, I fault myself for a lot of things in this podcast for not knowing things I should probably know. I don't know much about music in general. I'm really notoriously bad at it versus like my wife and her family. They know music very, very well. So maybe they're familiar with Bobby Aro. I maybe her dad probably is.
Maybe her parents. Yeah, that's the other big thing too. Is he was more active in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So unless you were, in fact, he passed away in 96. So that it stands to reason if he was, alive during those times and you were not. I think he's a little bit before your time.
Yeah, so that's why I can give myself extra credit for that guy. I don't know music that well generally.
I mean, he's also quite a bit. He's before my time. I mean, I was pretty young when he passed away. So I don't fault you for that. Yeah, he's not somebody who gets talked about as often anymore, though definitely still some people are very big. Anyway, but let's get into actually who he is. Bobby Aro was a performer, musician, and local radio DJ. He DJ'd at a lot of different local radio stations, a couple here in Duluth, a lot up on the range, and various stations would even also take his programs for rebroadcast as well, up in Ely and areas like that. So he, for many, many years, was well known for his kind of Finnish-focused songs and as well as his live performances where he would mix in like jokes and humor and a lot of like different variety kind of performance. He's kind of an old-timey song and dance type of a performer. Like a Dean Martin is how he's been described as, those kind of folks. Do you know Dean Martin? Sorry. Just because you also said that you don't know music, so I'm like, oh, is that even a reference that you know?
I know the name.
Okay.
Do I know who he is exactly?
No.
No.
No worries. I
recognize name. I'm good at recognizing songs. Like, I know that song. Can I tell you who it's by? Probably not.
You probably heard him and you've just not known it.
Probably,
no worries.
Yeah.
No worries. That's kind of a tangent, but
no worries.
All that to say, he's kind of that old style song and dance. He played with a band called the Ranch Arrows. Get it? His last name was Arrow. Anyway,
we love our puns here.
And so he played at a lot of different places locally and around the Northland and traveled a bit as well. I believe he performed all the way over in Finland at least once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he's kind of got a little bit of a cult following over there as well, according to another local musician who also played in Finland.
And so how did you hear about him? I mean, it sounds like he was like from the Iron Range and Iron Range more base, and you have your connection to the Iron Range. Is there anything from your upbringing that kind of helped this out, or just your connections from up there?
A couple of connections. First of all, his son, Casey, was also a really well-known performer around the range. He suffered a stroke a couple years back. I wrote a story about him then, unfortunately. He's still around, I believe, but not performing anymore, as far as I'm aware. And so he's someone who I grew up, like you would see him all the time at the county fair, or he would come to the schools, or he would be at Iron World, or it was Iron World at the time. Sorry, Minnesota Discovery Center. And names change.
It's all good.
Turning into my parents. Okay. And so I would see Casey Aro all the time. And so that was one connection. But then also, if you take Highway 70, so if you're up on the range and you go to, like, you're in the Virginia Mountain Iron area where the Dairy Queen is near Virginia.
Okay.
Back behind there is Highway 7. If you travel down Highway 7 all the way to like Highway 37 or something, it's County Road 7, but they call it Highway 7. That highway is known as the Bobby Aro Highway, and there's a giant sign as you first go onto it saying that it's Bobby Aro Highway, Memorial Highway. So it's dedicated to him. And so I definitely have traveled down that road several times and seen the sign and been like, oh, must be related to Casey, but I don't know. And so then when this was put on our list, our ever-growing and changing list of potential story ideas, I went, oh, yeah, obviously. I'd heard about him. I heard about him from, when I did the story on Casey. And I was like, okay, let me get more into this. That sounds like it'd be a very good story to do.
And reading through your article, it sounds like one of the sources you spoke to is a current living performer. I would say relatively well-known-ish in our region, Steve Sokola.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, even just in your article, he says himself, it was almost like a living embodiment of Bobby Aro. If there was a closest representation of a modern Bobby Aro, it's Steve Sokola.
I mean, he said himself, and you can see it in the article where he talks about how Bobby was passed away in 1996, and a couple months later, Steve was born also in 1996, and he's like, he said that God decided that he'd had enough of Bobby being in heaven and all of his Nordic jokes, so he sent him back down and became Steve. Living embodiment, yeah.
And if you know Steve Sokola, if you're aware of him at all, he's got an inflection to his voice, and it's iconic. I can hear him saying it. Yeah. I don't want to get too far into Steve Sokola, only because he's such an interesting guy that he almost warrants his own entry into Northlandia at some point.
I will add, however, though, that he was just somebody who was very much raised on his music and has created his own medley of Bobby's songs. And when I called to talk to him, he said, oh, yeah, anyone who wants to talk about Bobby, I'd love to talk to them. So I was like, great, this is good. So he talked to me a lot about why he likes him and why he's iconic and how he went to Finland earlier this year and he got requested to play some of Bobby's songs while he was over there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that connection that he has to Bobby Aro and everything he knows, like why he was a person to go to as a source for you.
Partially because he had created that medley and I saw that on one of his albums, so I knew he kind of had to have heard of him. I kind of went on a hunch. I was like, I bet he's heard of Bob. Well, and then I saw that he created the medley and I'm like, oh yeah, he's definitely heard it. Okay. So then I called him and I didn't realize also that he'd grown up also listening to Casey Aro up on the range with the rest of us. And as well as he used to play against, apparently he was a basketball player and he would play against, I didn't even include this in the article, but he'd play against one of Bobby's other sons' basketball teams on the range, and and afterwards they'd have friendly banter about Bobby and his love for him. And yeah, so I just knew he was a pretty large fan and he'd have a lot of opinions about him and give me some good recommendations about what were some of the really good songs, why is he important, and yeah.
What did he recommend?
So one of his biggest recommendations was to listen to his Highway 7 songs. And he specifically recommended his third Highway 7 song. So he took the Highway 7 song, he wrote it the first time, and that kind of became his theme song. So that was the one that people kind of associated with Bobby Aro. And then he wrote a second rendition that was kind of just like a parody of She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain. So she'll be coming down Highway 7 when she comes. And then he wrote a third one, which is a little bit more of a sentimental, but also still very fun journey and kind of look. And I listened to it. I was able to find it online, and I can see what he means by it being a little bit, you could tell he's a little bit older when he wrote this one, and it's a little bit more of like his farewell message in it a little bit. So yeah.
Any particular, because you listened to them, yeah? Was there one that stood out to you that was more of your calling and was like, oh, I like that song the most?
Not particularly. I just kind of I really enjoyed listening to the medley because when you listen to them all together, you kind of get an idea of what this man's performances were like. Granted, that was also by Steve, so that's a little bit different, but it was kind of fun to hear. And he'd mix in jokes in between, which I imagine is very much something that he would do. And yeah.
I love a good medley, though. Yes. You can't pick a song, just pick them all. Yes. Or a bunch of them.
That is something that Bobby was known for doing as well as creating medleys. So it feels appropriate that he also got his own medley. Yeah.
And as we talked about in the beginning here, one of the things he's known for is his use of Finnglish. Talk to me a little bit more about that. I'm assuming, like, face value hearing that, you'd think it's just a combination of Finnish and English.
Yes. And that's exactly what it is. So he spoke Finnish, and he was Finnish, though he liked to joke quite often that he wasn't actually Finnish. He just learned English from somebody who spoke Finnish, and so he had Finnish anyway. And so he had a bit of a Finnish. He could kind of put on this Finnish kind of twang to his voice and have that kind of sound to it. But he'd do a lot of mixing of like English and Finnish, even within the same song. He would put in like Finnish word and have words that were kind of mixtures of Finnish and English. Yeah, so that's what he kind of did. Is he did a little bit of Finnglish in that. Don't ask me for examples. I can't give you. I don't want to try and I don't want to do the pronunciation. That I read them mostly, so I'm like,
Yeah, no. We don't want to.
I don't want to upset any better Finnish speakers. The amount of Finnish that I can speak was like provided to me by my mother because she learned it. I don't even know if it's correct, but I can apparently count to 7 in Finnish, and that is it. So that's what I got. It's like iksi kaksi kolme neljä viisi kuusi seitsemän, and that's probably wrong. It's probably because it's coming from her who heard it from her father when she was a child. So I'm not very familiar.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's 7 more Finnish words than I know, even if they're incorrect.
I tried to learn further, and it's hard.
Mm-hmm. So, Teri, how does this all fit into Northlandia? How does Bobby Aro? How does his legacy fit into?
Well, he's definitely unique. I don't think there's another person quite like Bobby Aro. There's not another person who's done that many like DJ shows and radio performances, as well as that kind of unique style that he has to him. At least not that we're aware of. Granted, obviously now there's Steve who's doing his kind of thing, but
new reincarnation or a new form of him.
Yeah, and doing it at the time that he did it, and doing it with the songs that he did, and yeah. So I think he's definitely unique, and I think that's where he fits in. He took inspiration from his like background and growing up, and he mixed it in, and he became known for it. And I think that's a unique quality.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like he's kind of like his work is kind of like a product of
literally the Northland.
Yeah, the interesting, like Northland's such an interesting, weird place, hence why we have a Northlandia series. And, the Finnish immigrants and that whole side of history I feel like it just contributes to the fascinating things that happen in our region, especially up in the Iron Range when, mining's going on and stuff. And now it all leads to this Bobby Aro being able to create his own interesting twang. And
I don't know if twang is, but yeah.
This is further speaking to my ineptness when it comes to music. It's like, that sounds like a musical word.
Yeah, I don't know.
I was thinking musical. What's a word
accent,
that's good for musical? Twang, I guess.
Accent.
Yeah, accent.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If he wasn't raised here, if he wasn't born here, if he wasn't, from this area and then moved away and came back, he wouldn't be who he is. Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't be talking about him probably. I don't know. Hard to say.
Mm-hmm. All right, Teri. Well, thank you so much for bringing this here. I enjoy learning a little bit more about the interesting music of the region. I feel like there's so much more we can talk about when it comes to music, and then hopefully we can do more in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. Before we close it out here, listeners, you may have noticed a little dip in frequency of episodes lately. For the time being, new episodes will be released every other week. This is just to allow our reporting team more time to work on these stories along with the regular beats at the News Tribune. So our next episode will be available on our website within the column on Saturday, May 18th, and then Tuesday, May 21st in the podcast feed. You're not going to miss this next one, though, because arts and entertainment reporter Jay Gable returns to Northlandia to talk about the unofficial spokesperson and weather reporter for Grand Marais. So you're going to want to check out that episode. As always, to read the article for this week's column, as well as see photos, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories you just might miss around the right place at the right time, raced above the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.